Thank you all for joining us. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber. Everyone hear me okay? Move that a little bit closer. Is that better? That good? Okay, good. So before we get started, if you looked at the program, I was supposed to be joined today by my colleague Karen Andreas, who is the President and CEO of the North Shore Chamber and doing a terrific job up on the North Shore. And the strategy there was that in as much as commuter rail services outside of Boston, that we would collaborate with some of my colleagues and other business organizations outside of Boston. And Karen was planning to join us. Unfortunately, she's dealing with a family medical emergency and couldn't be here. And we're going to keep her and her family in our thoughts and prayers. So we'll miss you, Karen, but keep up the great good work. So welcome to the Chamber's Transportation First event, which is a conversation that today we're going to focus on the current and future state of commuter rail and regional rail. I understand there's some conversation about what we're going to call it from now on. Commuter rail is in my blood, but I understand the difference. This is, we brand this transportation first, and you'll hear more about this in just a minute. It's because the Chamber has several years ago, under the leadership of our then board chair, Ron O'Hanley from State Street, launched a program that we've called Transportation First, because it's our belief that underpinning many of the public policy issues that we try to solve together, whether it's housing, environment, access, and opportunity, transportation is really the bones and the backbone of much of our economy and much of what we want to get accomplished. And you can't solve those issues unless you solve transportation and access problems. So thus the brand Transportation First for this program. We continue to serve as a leading convener on the region's business community. And, this is just one of the ways that we try to bring together people from different sectors with different interests in this particular issue, transportation, and business leaders to have a conversation about where we are and what are the strategies and solutions that are necessary going forward, so that we as a region have the transportation systems network that frankly we all need and deserve in the Commonwealth. So we just have to continue to get after it. I'm pleased to have served on the governor's task force on transportation funding, which released its report in January. And that was followed up by a quite ambitious and bold proposal by the governor to fund transportation generally across the state, all modes, including the T, with $8 billion. Some of the things we've said as part of our advocacy in partnership with our friends at the T Advisory Board. I see Brian back there. One of the things we advocated for was that the state equally share the surtax revenues between transportation and education. Some of you that follow that may have seen that in the first year of funding, it was about 58% education and 42-ish% transportation. And we think that should, I don't think that was the expectation when people voted for it. And we advocated for it be more equally split. With the governor's proposal, if you do an aggregate of spending that's taken place and which he's proposed, it is almost exactly 50-50 between education and transportation. So that's a good thing, and we support much of what is in the governor's proposal as it relates to transportation broadly, and particularly putting the T on good footing to continue the work that the general manager has already led at the T. So with that, I do want to thank the sponsor of our Transportation First series. Ron launched it within the chamber during his time as our chair, and he stuck with it. And I think very important to developing the solutions we need here in Greater Boston is the voice of the business community, particularly the important voices of leaders like a guy that runs State Street Global and others who have such an important voice in our community to say that, not just for that company, but for the region, we need to do better. We need for our employees and for everybody, we need to do better. And that's certainly been Ron's mindset on this transportation issue. So we're very grateful to that, and we're very grateful that State Street has stepped up and sponsored this and enabled us to create it as a free and open forum for people to come to this room or participate virtually. So with that, thank you to State Street, and I'm pleased to welcome and introduce a friend, Carolyn Ryan, the managing director at State Street, to introduce today's speakers. So Carolyn.
Thank you, Jim. And on behalf of Ron and everyone at State Street, thank you everyone for being here. Welcome. We've got nearly 8,000 employees in the state of Massachusetts, most of them in Metro Boston. So we understand particularly well how important a high functioning transportation system, especially a commuter rail, is for both our employees and our businesses. First, I'm going to welcome Phil Eng, General Manager and CEO of the MBTA. Phil is a civil engineer with nearly 40 years of transportation experience, including as president of the MTA, New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, Long Island Railroad, and the interim president of New York City Transit. Phil brings his abilities to spearhead challenging initiatives, modernize aging systems, and prioritize safety to bear for the MBTA. Thank you, Phil. As a commuter rail and Orange Line rider, I've noticed a difference. Next, we have Mike Muller, Executive Director of the Commuter Rail at the MBTA. Mike is responsible for overseeing operations and maintenance of the current commuter rail system, as well as the Railroad Capital Program and future planning efforts. From 2019 to 2021, he was Assistant General Manager for strategic initiatives, directing and coordinating projects, programs, and communications in alignment with the agency's objectives. Welcome, Mike. Again, on behalf of State Street, thank you to the Chamber for pulling this together and continuing to shine a light on transportation. And thank you to Phil and Mike for being here and working to create a world-class transportation system. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Jim. For those of you who don't know, it cost me a fortune to have comments like that Carolyn made. Every time someone makes it, it's like $20 here, $20 there, but it helps. He ended with world-class transportation system. And, it kind of reminded me when I first was announced and I was asked about what I thought about the MBTA, and I said it's the best in the world, I think, or something to that. And you know why? It's because we should embrace what we have here. So many places don't have what we have here. And I know that a lot of things that we're doing right now are some of the best practices across the industry. And we're sharing that as we start to build out of our needs. And a lot of it, you referred to the Orange Line, Carolyn, it's just a demonstration of what we can do in other places. Commuter rail, regional rail, however you want to look at it. We know ridership patterns have changed, but we know how instrumental this rail part is to the whole transportation network. And one of the things Carolyn didn't say, but it is in my background, I worked on both the highway and bridge side, as well as the mass transportation side. And it really is a well-balanced transportation network system that really makes the economy, quality of life, that drives the things that people want. It's that freedom of mobility and the freedom to have choices on how to move about. And as we go into making regional rail, and it will be regional rail at some point, Jim, because that's really what we want. It's not just serving what used to be just the 9-to-5 commuters. We are seeing, and I'm sure Mike will talk about it, the robust ridership that has returned on our system. And that's because even before I got here, the notion to move towards all day, all frequent service, weekdays, weekends, is giving people that freedom of flexibility to make choices of when to come in and use rail, knowing they could go home on a reasonable time. The off-peak, and I used to do it myself, I'd take a different branch on a weekend in Long Island, if I knew my branch on Long Island had 2-hour waits between trains. That's what gets people back. Frequent, reliable, robust service, strongest return to ridership across the nation. And that's because of where we've been, but we're not resting on those laurels because we know that we can do better. And that's where we're going to be. As an agency, holding ourselves accountable, working with our partners to set expectations, but also to follow up and facilitate those expectations is where we are taking this agency. We have a strong leadership team, and we're working on not only improving service for today, but making sure that we can deliver that level of service that we expect in the future. And that's not just the team that we have today, but also building a strong team that's going to be here long beyond whatever 40 years I have plus to go, because it's exciting. And the challenge, while it is every day a new challenge, is something that we take away and say, let's take it head on and let's figure out solutions. Putting people in positions to succeed. It's finding solutions, not letting challenges be the reason you don't do it. And I think as we talk a little bit more, how do we make sure that the investment in transportation, which the Healy Driscoll administration is doing to stabilize us right now, how do we make sure we put that to good use? How do we deliver and execute the projects and the results that the public needs? And how do we actually find ways to deliver it sooner and not just talk about it? That's our goal, and that's what we've been trying to demonstrate over the last almost 2 years, is that we can deliver a public agency, and be more efficient. We can be more accountable, and we will continue to improve on everything we do and always look towards the future because it's about future generations, not just the current ones we're serving. How do we keep people in Massachusetts? How do we make people want to come to Massachusetts, not just to visit, but to come here, live and work and play? My daughter who went to Northeastern, she decided to stay because she loved the transit system. And that's key. Someone who grew up on Long Island and you didn't have access to the subway system every time, but then when you see the freedom of being able to get about, not have to drive, it's fantastic. And, there's so many places in suburbs where, everybody has to own a car and everybody uses a car, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what we want to do is make transportation, that key thing that's a preferred choice of travel. And as we do this, it's working with our local partners across the Commonwealth, because that last mile, first mile is so crucial, working with the RTAs, which is also why I think the governor's proposal to fund transportation across the Commonwealth, not just MBTA, is huge, because we need our partners to be successful too. So I think with that, I probably took up more than the 5 minutes you allotted to me. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Muller because he is going to give you much more facts and figures and dive into it, and then we could take some Q&A. All right, so Mike, come on up.
Thank you, Bill. Let me see a little clicker here. There we go. Always a trick to figure out how to work each one of these little clickers whenever you do one of these. There we go. Okay, so we'll start with a little bit of overview of the commuter rail system here in Massachusetts. We serve 173 cities and towns. We have nearly 400 route miles. We have some areas of double track and some sidings. So it's a total of 650 track miles over the course of those almost 400 route miles. We serve 141 stations. In terms of daily train trips, we're currently providing more train service than at any time previously in the entire history of the service. We're operating 524 weekday trains and almost 250 weekday trains. Compared to 2019, before the pandemic, the service that we were running, which at that time was the highest level of service that we had ever run, it was a little over 500 weekday trains a day. And we had actually a split Saturday and Sunday service where we were operating 220 trains on Saturdays and 194 on Sundays. We're now running the same level of weekend service on Saturdays and Sundays, but running more service than ever before on both weekdays and weekends. We serve a little over 500,000 weekday passengers. Talk a little bit about ridership more in a moment. And as you've probably heard before, and Phil just mentioned, we have the highest ridership recovery of any of our peer commuter rail agencies in the nation, hovering somewhere between 90 and 95% of 2019 ridership. On-time performance is another good news story. We're right around 92% on-time performance. That's unadjusted raw OTP. That again is the highest level of reliability that we've ever had in the history of this system. I'm going to show another slide that shows where we were and how far we've come on reliability, and that has a lot to do with why we think we see ridership coming back in the numbers that we're seeing. There we go. So again, best ridership recovery in the nation. You can see us here, and the print is small, but you can see us compared to our peers down here. You can also see it's kind of interesting. There's some seasonality in everybody's ridership. One of the things I noticed when we just recently updated this data is that everybody had a spike in October. We were kind of already there. Certainly the ridership gains that we see every October have a lot to do with Halloween and haunted happenings. But we think when you look at trends across the whole entire industry, you know, it's that post Labor Day return to school. A lot of companies organize their return to office activities post Labor Day in the fall. And then it's very, very typical seasonally to see ridership drop off in November and December on a monthly basis because of vacations, holidays, and then now with the different travel behavior that you're seeing with the hybrid work environment, you know, people tend to tack telework days on the beginning and the ends of vacations. If there's a bad weather day, people tend to telework instead of taking the train or commuting in. You see a little bit of that, and that's all baked into the seasonality. So even where we're experiencing ridership far and above our peers, you can see that the seasonal trends are pretty common across the whole industry. So why does the MBTA have the MBTA commuter rail, I'm sorry, have the best ridership recovery in the nation? Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? You have to give credit where credit's due. A lot of this has to do with the fact that we are the 4th most congested city in the nation, right? So when you see this, this is sort of like baked in demand, right? That people don't want to be in this traffic. So the alternative, if you live in the suburbs where you can't be served by the subway and the bus system, this is your alternative. Your alternative to this is the commuter rail. So we have this sort of latent demand that exists there. I think in the past, we haven't been able to take full advantage of it because of issues with reliability, frequency. There's still some issues that we know we need to address going forward about folks being priced out of the fare structure. There's a lot of potential here. And I say this all the time, and you've probably heard me say it before if you've ever heard me talk about this. I look at this picture and I see opportunity. Sometimes I'm in this traffic. Usually I take the train, and I prefer to see this outside the window of my train as I'm passing by. But when I see it, whether I'm in the traffic or looking out the window, I think of all these people that could be riding our trains if we can increase reliability, increase frequency, electrify, and make the kind of investments in rolling stock and infrastructure that will attract people to the system. I want to talk a little bit about our schedules. One of the reasons why we think ridership has exceeded that of our peers is because during the pandemic, when ridership was at its very lowest, we took the opportunity to change our whole service paradigm. It's something that we had been planning and studying for years leading up to that point. But as everybody knows how disruptive seasonal schedule changes can be, there's never really any good time to blow up the whole schedule and change it. Whenever we do that, even today, we hear from people, you moved my train by 5 minutes and now I can't drop my kid off at the right time. And I'd live that. That's my life too. So that is totally valid. But in 2021, when we were eking out of the pandemic and nobody was riding, it was the perfect opportunity to say, we know there's this latent demand in the midday that we're not serving. We know there's this latent demand later at night that we're not serving. We know that more people want frequency on the weekends, off-peak times, accommodate different kinds of non-work trips. Let's use this opportunity to kind of shake everything up and go to an all-day clock face frequency schedule. So we did that. And what we saw was that ridership really responded. All different types of riders that are not your typical 9-to-5 Boston-centric office workers started using the system for non-work trips at different times of the day and the weekend. That's where a lot of the ridership gains came from. The percentage ridership gains in the midday, the off-peak, and the weekends actually far exceeds the ridership recovery that we've seen in the traditional AM and PM weekday peaks. Similarly, I talked a little bit about the weekends. Whereas we have about 90, 85, 90% ridership recovery on the weekdays, we have like 200% ridership recovery on the weekends. I think part of that is driven by something that happened to our collective psyche during the pandemic and people wanting to get out more and people not necessarily wanting to get in a car and then go pay $40 to park with the family. So we introduced this, it was actually a few years ago before the pandemic, this $10 weekend pass product. So that an adult can pay $10 and ride as many times as they want for the whole entire weekend. We have seen the uptake on that product just skyrocket off the charts ever since ridership started coming back post-pandemic. So weekend gains, largely driven by our fare product, have driven a lot of the ridership gains that we've seen as well. And then, of course, improved reliability. So if you look at this chart, this is our reliability from 2015 to the first month of 2025. Now, I think everybody knows what happened here, right? 2015, this is the Snowmageddon winter, right? So you can see that number would probably be up here because we were hovering around 89% for many, many years. But Snowmageddon did that. And then this is like a return to normal around 89%. Then these bars kind of like don't really count. You have to take those with a grain of salt because there was like 10% ridership and at least for 2020, like a very limited service. So it's not hard to have excellent on-time performance then. But as we came out of the pandemic and all of the factors that I sort of just described kind of came together, we started to see this all-day frequency and all the investments that we had made in the system during the pandemic to improve reliability and resiliency in the system really came to fruition. And you can see that 2023 was our best year in terms of on-time performance ever. And that's when we started hearing a lot of word of mouth from the riders that had come back sort of saying that, oh, sorry, should I hold the microphone? Okay. That, you know, we started hearing these things and we started getting media inquiries about it to say, hey, the commuter rail is really reliable these days. Like, and people started, you know, telling each other that you should really think about taking the train. And that's when those people in that picture started getting out of their cars and taking the train in greater numbers. And we've been able to largely maintain that. You can see at the end of 2024 there, we were on pace to stay around 92% or above, but we had a really, really challenging slippery rail season, which we're just trying to unpack still. But that really put a serious dent in the numbers. It's interesting when you dig into the delay data, how if you have one poor stretch due to one particular catastrophic thing, it can really affect the numbers for the whole period. Okay, so 92%, as I think Jim said and Phil said, we know it's good, it's better than it's ever been, but it's not good enough. It's not what we need, and we're not ready to settle for 92%. It's not good enough to induce the kind of ridership gains that we know are possible. What we need is the transportation system of the future. We need a high-frequency, decarbonized regional rail service that serves, again, not just the traditional Boston-centric 9 to 5 trips, but all different types of trips going in both directions with a strong reverse commute and serving a variety of different kinds of needs for travel. So going through here, the goals for regional rail modernization, it's really actually worth going through these and reading them even though they're here. Support regional growth, equity, and environmental justice by providing better connections between areas of affordable housing and employment centers. Decarbonize by electrifying service and attracting riders from cars with quicker, more frequent, and reliable service. Prioritize safety, of course, quality, on-time performance, operational flexibility, and reliability through modernized performance management mechanisms. Ensure any contract is the right size to deliver the best value for the taxpayers and structured to optimize whole life costs for major investments by aligning contract life to useful life. That's a lot to unpack there. Talk a little bit about that later. And maintain a highly skilled workforce with strong union representation and invest in workforce development to support the transition. So those are our goals. That's sort of our vision for this transportation system of the future. But let's unpack a little bit what we mean by regional rail modernization. So rail modernization is about transforming our legacy commuter rail system into a high-frequency decarbonized regional rail service. Some of the core elements of this, you got to talk about frequency, right? The sexy part of regional rail is the decarbonization. Everybody wants electrification. Everybody wants new electric vehicles. We're going to do that. We're going to invest in that. That is a core piece of this. But before you even get to that, we know from lots of studies and surveys and stakeholder engagement and rider engagement that we've done that although people really do care about the climate and they care about decarbonization, it's very important. What they care about even more is high frequency convenience service. That's what makes the difference actually to get people out of cars and onto trains. Is the train coming frequently enough that I don't need to memorize a schedule or go into my phone and see when the next train is coming? If I just barely missed this train, do I now need to make a different choice, or can I just sit and wait for the next train that's coming 15 or 20 minutes later? We know that that level of show up and ride frequency is really what's going to move the needle in terms of maximizing the utility of this asset. So looking about what's possible with the current infrastructure and the vehicle fleet that we have and investments that we're planning on the horizon, what we're really shooting for is 15 to 20 minute frequency. It's sort of an urban rail situation inside of Route 128, roughly speaking. That has a lot to do with the way the infrastructure is configured on the inner part of the system versus the outer part of the system. And then there are a lot of places in our network, because not all lines are created equal, where we think that the best that we can achieve might be 30 to 60 minutes outside Route 28. But as we would iterate on this in a phased way and never really stop continuously investing and improving to try to get the whole system as close to 30-minute headways as we possibly could. And then this is key. Trying to achieve a regular clock face schedule, which we largely have now in both directions, so that the trains come at the same intervals throughout the day, so nobody's having to worry about checking a timetable. It's really a show up and ride scenario where you're always 20 to 30 minutes away from the next train. In terms of ridership, I already talked a lot about this. We're interested in not just the traditional 9-to-5 office workers, but students, lab workers, sports fans. Non-work trips are a big part of this, particularly in the evenings and on the weekends. And then the trains. I mean, this is the part that everybody really gets excited about when they think about regional rail modernization, because we are running a very traditional legacy style commuter fleet. When you think about the modernized trains of the future, you think about battery electric multiple units, like we're going to be introducing in the Fairmount line in 2028. These are cleaner, quieter, so it's friendlier to neighbors and abutters. Better amenities. If any of you have ever had the opportunity to attend a conference or go somewhere where another system, a peer system where you can ride or step onto one of these trains, it just has a modern, airy, different feel than the kind of very traditional old school rolling stock that we're offering today. Electric, of course, decarbonization is key. And we'll talk a little bit in a moment about our aging diesel fleet and the need to replace them in the near term. And then speed, right? So we're not talking about maximum authorized speed. These electric trains of the future won't necessarily reach a higher speed than the diesel trains, but they do accelerate and brake faster, which reduces journey time between stations. And then the last little piece of this, which is really important, is the contract structure. And this is something that we're currently taking a look at. The current contract is very similar to the structure that we've always had, which is really just focused on the operations and maintenance of the current system. The capital investment associated with this whole transformation is billions of dollars that exceeds the capacity of the MBTA's existing capital investment planning process. So we really are exploring opportunities to leverage the future contract to incorporate some of these investments, and how can we use the contract as a vehicle to deliver this type of regional rail modernization on a shorter time horizon than we otherwise would be able to do through the traditional capital planning process, which would take decades. So what's our strategy for regional rail? So we talked a little bit about decarbonization. The traditional way to think about decarbonizing, and we looked at this with the Rail Vision study back in 2018, 2019, would have been through full continuous overhead catenary systems and power infrastructure, and with trains that use a pantograph to draw power from the catenary. That would have been 600 miles of overhead wires, and I think the estimated price tag at the time was somewhere in the range of $30 billion. For 600 miles of overhead catenary system and all the associated challenges with putting catenary on pieces of infrastructure like historic low tunnels, drawbridges, permitting through wetlands, high-density residential areas, historic downtown areas. It would have been cost prohibitive and in some cases impossible to contemplate putting up 600 miles of overhead catenary throughout this entire system. But technology has evolved. And so now the concept that we've sort of coalesced around is discontinuous catenary, which is an approach that's used elsewhere in the world, where you use a battery electric vehicle that has both battery capabilities and takes power from overhead catenary wires with the use of a pantograph. And then you just don't put up overhead catenary wires on the whole 600 miles of the system. Our studies estimate that we could actually get away with about 250 miles of catenary instead of 600 miles of catenary. And then you just don't hang the catenary where there's a low tunnel or a historic downtown area or a wetland or a drawbridge. And so the vehicle draws power from the catenary when it's operating under the catenary and then operates on a battery on areas in between catenary. And that's the approach we're planning to use first on the Fairmount line, starting in 2028. And we'll be looking to expand that approach elsewhere on the system where appropriate, along with keeping an open mind about other vehicle technologies and other types of battery electric trains as technology continues to evolve. In addition, it's not just about electrification and vehicles, it's also about track and signal upgrades, adding double tracking, triple tracking, passing sidings, maintenance facilities, really just investing in capacity wherever we can. Because what we know about certain parts of our system, I'm thinking about the old colony lines, for example, there's an 11-mile stretch of single track. You could electrify it today, and you're not going to get very many more trips or much faster service or higher frequency service because of an 11-mile stretch of single track. We can't really optimize the potential of that line in terms of frequency and throughput until we expand the track capacity and upgrade the signalization on a line like the old colony lines. Another great example of a no regrets infrastructure investment is North Station Draw. So while not strictly part of the Regional Rail Modernization Program, it is an existential infrastructure project for the regional rail system. It's the gateway to the entire north side. So you can invest billions in electrifying the entire north side service, but you don't have a north side service if you don't have a functional North Station drawbridge that every single north side train goes across. So we're very fortunate to have won a federal grant for about $500 million. And we're currently working within the MBTA right now with the project team and railroad operations to try to explore different delivery methods that could accomplish the project in as short a time frame as possible, while still continuing the same level of service that we're providing today and not having to do a bunch of prolonged and disruptive diversions. And then finally, I was going to talk about accessibility. There we go. Accessibility is really important because it's not only about ADA compliance, which is hugely important. The commuter rail, as far as the MBTA and accessibility is concerned, is really kind of the last frontier for accessibility. We still have about 30 stations that are not accessible or ADA compliant, and we're slowly chipping away at those and trying to make accessibility investments. But where you make accessibility improvements, you also make operational improvements. You can reduce dwell times and increase service frequency by making investments in full high-level platforms, elevated passenger walkways with up and overs. All of these things really improve the operation as well as accessibility. So those of you who have heard me speak about this before know I like to make a little joke here and say, now approaching a locomotive fleet cliff. So this is what I was talking about our aging diesel fleet. So I won't explain all of this here, but these are the different types of vehicles in the locomotive fleet. They're all very old. The newest, youngest locomotives in the fleet were brand new in 2015. They're now due for their first midlife overhaul. So roughly half of the locomotive fleet needs to go out of service very soon for a midlife overhaul. The rest of the fleet, some of which are 40 and 50 years old, have already gone through one or more midlife overhauls, and we need to be getting into a mode of procuring the fleet of the future and starting to retire these old, reliable plow horses that are getting less and less reliable all the time. That's just the truth. So while we think about decarbonizing, investing in infrastructure, and particularly about electrification, the timelines don't really add up the way that we would hope that they do. It's going to take a long time to invest in infrastructure and hang even the discontinuous catenary and install the power infrastructure to deliver the transportation system of the future. It could take 10 to 15 years to build, to construct all of the electrification infrastructure to really decarbonize the whole system. The fleet is falling apart now. We're going to have to start making decisions about the future fleet and what does that look like before we've completed the full electrification of the system. So what does that mean? It means we're going to be paying very careful attention to evolving technology, and we're going to be making iterative, phased decisions about replacing the micro fleets within the overall fleet that need replacing as soon as possible, while still keeping the rest of the fleet going at the same time. So this is really going to be a process of trying to keep everything going while we're modernizing and improving at the same time. One of the things that we've just done to that end is, and I think some folks were probably surprised by this, we had procured in 2019 83 bi-level Hyundai Rotem coaches, and we just exercised options for 80 more. So although we are embarking on this modernization strategy that includes battery electric multiple unit trains for the Fairmount line, that's forward looking at electric vehicles on other lines, we knew that because of what I just described, that we have some coaches that probably need to be retired ASAP, that it made sense to exercise those bi-level coach options now. They'll be here between 2026 and 2028. And we can retire the oldest coaches in the fleet, replace them with the bi-level coaches. And it's not a wasted investment, because even if we retire the diesel locomotives tomorrow and invest in some sort of electric locomotive or battery electric locomotive, these coaches are agnostic about power and can be pulled by electric locomotives or battery electric locomotives, the same as diesel. And then finally, this is really exciting, I want to talk about the Fairmount line. And I don't know how to use this remote. Okay, so the Fairmount Line Decarbonization Program. So we've partnered with Keolis, our operator, who has experience in this area internationally, procuring battery electric trains. We started with the Fairmount line because it's 10 miles long. It's located entirely within the city of Boston. It's basically a straight line. It's already mostly full high-level platforms. It's really the ideal place to decarbonize first with a new type of technology. Where we have heard concerns in the past from some folks about the ability for batteries to go the distance, we figured a 10-mile line is a great place to start. It also has the advantage of existing electrification infrastructure at both ends of the line, at Reedville, where it connects to the Northeast Corridor, which is operated by Amtrak, and then also at South Station. So in partnering with Keolis, we are procuring battery electric multiple unit trains. So this is not a locomotive push-pull situation with coaches. Each of these is a independently powered vehicle. There will be 4 car sets coupled together. So we'll be procuring 7 trains, which is 28 individual cars. And they will operate, as I described before, using a pantograph on limited catenary at both ends of the line and wherever else is needed. But for most of the line, they'll operate on the battery. Our studies have indicated we can achieve 20-minute frequencies between trains using an all battery electric multiple unit fleet on the Fairmount line. And these vehicles will be in revenue service on the Fairmount line in 2028. So I have already talked a whole lot about this stuff. This is all redundant of what I've already said, but I do want to highlight, because particularly right now, we're in some conversations with some communities about train noise. And one of the advantages of battery electric multiple units is quieter service for abutters and neighbors next to rail yards, stations, tracks. As I said before, this isn't just a whole new experience for passengers, it's a whole new experience for communities and neighbors as well. So a little bit about the contract. So it's currently underway. We're working on the procurement as we speak. The current contract with Keolis expires June 30th of 2027. We did issue a market sounding RFI in March of 2024 and got 29 responses from the industry. We've gone through that and we're evaluating all the different feedback that we've gotten, and we're evaluating the different contract options best suited for regional rail modernization. So that's really our focus. You know, there's the existing contract structure, which is really about operations and maintenance of the system. But as we look to our peers domestically and internationally, are there different contract structures that we can leverage to incorporate some of the capital investments of electrification and regional rail modernization and deliver on the promise of regional rail sooner than we otherwise could if we include those elements in the successor contract? A little snapshot of the timeline here. We are working towards the release of an RFP in the fall of this year. Proposals would then be due 1 year later in the fall of 2026. We would do evaluations and select an awardee by the end of calendar year 2026 or very, very early in 2027. And then the first half of 2027, which is the last 6 months of the Keolis contract, of the current Keolis contract, would be for mobilization and transition. And then just to end on a really happy and exciting note, I know the general manager already announced this, and I think he was in Freetown night before last. Exciting announcement, South Coast Rail is finally coming. It's happening for real. Revenue service starts March 24th of 2025, which will be the same day that we do the spring schedule change for the entire system. The South Coast Rail project includes 6 new commuter rail stations in South Coast communities, parking facilities that include 1,800 parking spots. In terms of the service, we're actually delivering a lot more than what was originally committed to in the initial project planning documents. Direct train service between Boston and Fall River or New Bedford will be every 70 minutes. That's a total of 32 trains each weekday. Plus, in addition to the 32 trains direct between Fall River, New Bedford, and Boston, we're doing a connecting service between East Taunton and Fall River, New Bedford, where that will run staggered in between the direct service trains to essentially shorten the headways. So the connecting service, what I mean by that is those will be a 2-seat ride. So if you missed your direct train from New Bedford to Boston, you can catch a train 45 minutes later that'll take you to East Taunton, where you can make a connection and go direct to Boston from there. And then on the weekends, so weekend service was never contemplated and never considered as part of the original South Coast Rail planning documents. We will be providing a weekend service about every 2 hours, so about 26 trains on Saturdays and Sundays. So very exciting stuff. This is the last slide I have. I wanted to end on a really high note that this is decades in the making. I think it was something like 5 gubernatorial administrations talked about South Coast Rail, and it's happening. So.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Phil. Thankfully, you've anticipated most of the questions that we might ask. And, my reaction is, when can I have it all? When can we get all of this? But a couple of quick sort of fact questions. You talked about the size dynamics of our regional rail system, and I'll make the conversion to regional rail. I made the conversion from east-west to west-east, so I'll do the regional rail thing. Where do we rank? How big is our regional rail system as compared to some of those other players that you mentioned on that chart?
I think in terms of the system, we're about the 5th or 6th largest system in the country, but in
Just the regional rail
just the
network.
commuter
Yeah.
rail, regional rail. But in terms of the contract, we are the largest transportation contract of its kind in North America.
Oh, Okay. You know, when in this room, coming out of COVID, we had many meetings with transportation officials who were talking about a philosophy of, well, we can't bring back the service levels until the riders come back. And we argued that, well, they're not going to come back until you bring the service levels back. And it's fulfilling to hear you talk about that as one of the reasons why the services has returned to pre-pandemic levels or near it. You mentioned you're at 90 to 95%, and all of the benefits of having it. Talk about what's it going to take, and I think you alluded to some of this, but given where you are, what's it going to take to get that to 100% or 110% or 120% so that that traffic congestion issue can be impacted? What's it going to take for that to take place? And does it include even more service levels?
It does. I think it's increased service frequency, increased reliability. I kind of talked about this concept of the show up and ride service. So on some of our lines, the best we can do right now within the constraints of the existing infrastructure and vehicle fleet is hourly service. And we know that's just not getting people out of cars. So we need to increase the service frequency on every single line, and we need to make it just easier and convenient and more attractive for people to make that choice.
But today you don't have the resources to do that. Is that?
Not all at once.
Yeah.
We have the resources to make incremental change over time, sort of one project at a time, but not to do everything I talked about today all at once.
Disaggregate the system a little for me. So, you know, you talked about overall performance. What branches of the network are performing better, and, you know, what branch is your headache?
It's always been true that the Fitchburg line, the Worcester line, and the Franklin line have been the most challenging when it comes to reliability. Now, all of them right now are over 90% because we're doing pretty well and slippery rail season is over. But, you know, there's some of the longer lines. There's some lines that have the most infill stations, so lots of stops and starts, lots of trees. So slippery rail season is rough. We get a lot of rough winter weather on those lines as well. They get hit the hardest in winter storms. And then honestly, when you think about the Worcester line, it's one of the higher ridership lines. And it is sort of one of these truisms in transportation that where you have higher ridership, you do have potential in certain circumstances for longer dwell times and things like that that just kind of slow down the operation.
And which one's your good child?
The Fairmount line is always around 99% on-time performance. Greenbush is hot on its trail, though. Greenbush is up around 97, and Lowell, very high on-time performance.
Okay.
If I could just add to that, how do we get more people to use, you know, the mass transportation system? And one of our goals is not just to have a good on-time performance at the end of the year because it's good in certain months and other months not as good. The real is to have reliable, robust service year-round, day in, day out. So when we do have an incident, it's a one-off, because, you know, when you're working in these environments, things do happen. But how do we get to that level of consistently on-time performance, high levels of on-time performance throughout the year, month after month after month? That is going to be what we're going to continue to push for. You asked a little bit about earlier, how do we get to that sooner? And while we don't have enough dollars to do everything we want today, you know, Mike talked about double track, triple track, but if we don't have enough for that right now, you could put sidings in, you could put passing sidings where you know trains are meeting, and you could then allow us to schedule more trains and have points where you can pass one another in opposite directions. You know, so we're going to be very strategic with how we plan dollars. We're not going to say we don't have enough to do the whole thing. And we're going to look to say, does this provide meaningful benefit to the riders? Does this give them the impetus to say, let's use the regional rail system? And Mike alluded to it. It's the environment in which we want our riders to experience the, you know, you just show up. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to plan about it. And then when you get onto the train, it's welcoming. When you go into the station, it's welcoming. It's clean. It's safe. And all of that goes hand in hand with getting people to get out of their cars, or at least to know that we are not only a viable option, but we're a good option. And then the other piece, as we look to improve service and expand service, how do we make sure that we're partners with the communities that we not only serve directly, but the communities that we travel through? Because that is another piece of rail, and we know it, and Mike talked about it, the importance of it as we move towards electrification, quieter trains, more environmentally friendly trains, but also making sure that the communities that we serve and the communities that we go through benefit from the regional rail. And you talked about the whole thing is transportation first, is because transportation is essential. Regardless of what mode you want to choose, that is essential. And I say that, it's like air and water. You need it. And when it's not there, people talk about it, right? So this is really us continuing to challenge ourselves to think outside the box. How do we do more, whether it's with less, or how do we just keep moving in the right direction? Make decisions that move the needle in the right direction. Make decisions that don't preclude your ultimate goal.
So I want to talk a little bit about fares, fare collection. You introduced the fare gates at South and North stations. How are they working out? What's the reception been?
Well, they are at North Station. They're not at South Station
Not at
yet.
South Station.
South Station, they're coming later this spring. We've
Okay.
been coordinating with the air rights
I
project
live in the
there.
city, so I don't take the.
But they're working exceptionally well at North Station.
Mhm.
I don't think that they were particularly popular when they first showed up, but we saw an instant uptick in revenue and invalidated tickets. So it is a remarkable. We know that 90% of our journeys on the whole network go through North Station, South Station, or Back Bay. So by gating those stations, and it's a different type of fare gate than what's on the subway. So you have to tap in and tap out. You need a valid ticket to actually exit the gate as well. So it gets you coming and going. We know that is the best tool in our arsenal for fare collection.
So, I want to probe a little the fare evasion thing, and I want to set some context. When we advocate a lot for funding to support the MBTA, public transportation, generally transportation investment, some of the feedback we get is, why don't they just collect the fares that they should be getting before you ask us for more money to support? What's happening in the fare evasion space, and the anecdotes we hear about people sort of gaming the system and waiting until the conductor comes around to sort of see if you have your fare or not? What level are you seeing, and what's your response to that criticism?
So it's kind of challenging to track the exact level because it's based on observation, anecdote. We are tracking the number of M-Ticket activations through the Masabi app. We are tracking the number of ticket scans by conductors on board trains, the sales using the handheld devices from conductors on trains, the number of folks that go through the fare gate. So those are the tools that we have to track it. But if somebody's going to great lengths to evade fares, or if there's an individual conductor who are not checking fares the way that they're supposed to, the way that we really find out about that is our own anecdotal experience as a rider on the system and feedback from customers and other colleagues on the system. There's mechanisms that we then use with Keolis to address those issues as they happen. And this is an area that we're very focused on for exactly the reasons that you said. The data does indicate that the perception is perhaps worse than the reality, but it sort of sticks with you. If you're a monthly pass holder and you're paying $300 or more a month for a monthly pass, and you see somebody else who's not paying, that's frustrating, particularly when you hear about the T's financial difficulties. So it is something we pay very close attention to.
Yeah, at the same time, we have on our regular monthly meetings with leadership at Keolis, we have stressed the importance of fare collection, and I give them credit for stepping up the effort. If we go back and we go and look at the records, the number of scans by the conductors has gone up increasingly every month as we push for this. At the same time, the gates are the thing that we're working towards, because we know the conductors on the trains have other duties as well with the doors and safety. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be collecting, and they are improving that. But we are focused on getting the gates. It's an unfortunate because fare evasion is not just here in Boston and Massachusetts. Fare evasion exists across
The world.
agencies, unfortunately, everywhere. And I've seen agencies develop new gates that are meant to avoid fare evasion, and folks still very clever and
Figure
figure
out.
things out. So it's a balance between what is the right investment to collect the fare versus is it a losing proposition. That doesn't mean we shouldn't collect it because, as Mike says, the folks that are paying, doing the right thing, we need to encourage everyone else. If you want the robust system, we do rely on that revenue to
Yeah.
help us keep delivering it. But we're going to keep pushing ourselves because we're holding ourselves accountable to how do we collect those fares.
Yeah, and sticking with fares, I want to talk about pricing a little bit. Mike, you used the phrase being priced out. And $300 monthly passes, there's much higher monthly passes than that. It's a big cost issue for consumers. How do you think about that? And I'll reflect back on sort of, um, my day when we had, distance space fares and the belief that wealthier people lived out in the suburbs, so they can pay more and they're consuming more, taking a longer ride. But now it's a real big kind of household choice to where do I live? What's the commuter rail going to be like? And, it may conflict with some of our other goals, like opening up housing markets if the commuter rail price is very high. How do you think about pricing? Back in the day, it was, we need this much money, so this is how much it's going to cost. It didn't consider other public policy issues. How are you thinking about pricing going forward?
Well, we're very focused on making it affordable. We absolutely are doing our best. I mean, when I first started, I think it was $5 million in our budget to look at low-income fares. I'm pleased to say that we not only didn't use the $5 million just to study it, we used the $5 million to figure out how to implement it. And right now, that low-income fare, income eligible fare that we're calling it now, is actually been very robust. A lot of people have been able to sign up, and we made that a key part. We're not looking at fares to offset all of our needs. What we need to do is just make sure the fares that we're focused on is being collected. Having said that, it's important for us to keep in mind prices are going up everywhere, and we want people to use mass transportation. And we're not a for-profit agency; we're a public service. So how do we balance that? I give all the credit to the Healy Driscoll administration for their support and stabilizing us for the next few years. We have some homework to do ourselves. We still have to figure out how to make sure we continue to be more and more efficient because we have to do some cost savings ourselves. But that together allows us to really think a little deeper and longer about what should be the right amount in the future. And right now, it's about making it safe, reliable, more robust with the means we have, and
Yeah.
making it affordable for folks that really don't have a choice to drive, perhaps, and want to use the mass
Well,
transit system.
I'm sure this will have some impact on the dialogue about pricing going forward, but from the business community and chambers perspective, and I know Ron O'Hanley's been a leader on us changing the mindset from user-based fee structures for consuming mobility and transportation to understanding that transportation is a public good. And, how do we embed our pricing policies into that mindset so that people can afford to do it? And it's not just low income, it's the workforce that, maybe can't always afford it. On that note, you didn't mention it. What's the monthly pass from Fall River to New Bedford going to be? That's in zone like 45 or something, isn't it?
No, it's in zone 8. We kept it in zone 8. There's no zone higher than zone 8 within Massachusetts. I don't know the dollar value of the monthly pass off the
All
top
right,
of my
zone
head,
8,
but zone
zone
8.
8. You heard it here first.
It's 12 and a quarter one way, $6 is the income eligible rate. So we could do the math there.
Okay. Parking lots. You mentioned the Fall River New Bedford plan. What about the rest of the system? Are they filling up? Are they a headache? And that's an added cost for the commuter as well. What's going on with because this is generally, as Phil, you said, there's a last mile kind of thing here. People got to get to the station. A lot of them drive the mile or two and park there, especially in bad weather. What's the situation with the parking lots?
So by the numbers, parking occupancy is actually very low. I mean, it was up around 75, 80%. In 2019, it's around 35% now system-wide. Now, there is a high level of variation between individual facilities. So where you have some parking facilities with very few spaces, I have no doubt they fill up every day. We also have some very large parking facilities with some very low occupancy.
So I'm going to move off of the rider experience and ridership in a minute, but I do need to ask, what's your number one complaint and how are you addressing it? I can't believe you have to think about it, Mike. You know what it is.
Well, it depends. I mean, I think I made a comment about noise complaints while I was up there. It's on my mind right now. We are dealing with a couple issues about, we need to be better neighbors to butters next to some of our rail yards. And we're working at that. So community complaints, it's definitely about train noise, not just in rail yards, but at stations as well. In terms of riders, it's typically about on-time performance. If somebody has a bad experience, and sometimes it could be one of these really uniquely bad experiences having to do with a police action on the tracks or another accident of some type where the rider might not be privy to all the details, but might have had a bad experience being stuck on a train for an hour and a half. Those we hear about those incidents.
Yeah, I remind people on.
I don't know. I'm not saying this is not a complaint I get. This is something I keep stressing to the
Yeah.
team is how do we continue to improve communications with the public? Those on our trains, those in our system, and those before they even get to the system. And that's something that goes a long way to the rider's experience as well. If we have an unfortunate issue like a train cancellation, it's so much better if they knew before they got to the station. If we have a delay, they should know that we have a delay, and they should know how long the delay is. So these are the things that we're not just on the regional commuter rail system, but in our whole system. How do we give the riders more real-time information? That's why we're continuing to push things like the MBTA Go app, and that's how we're trying to really make sure that you can make an informed decision before you choose whichever route you're taking and whichever mode you're taking. I think that goes to a lot of frustrations in the past, and the ability to improve communications is huge. Whether it's planned work, whether it's unexpected issues, or whether it's just services running well. I think people need to know that to be able to feel good about the system as well. So that's my one thing that I keep pushing, because I think whether you're trying to deliver a capital project, whether you're trying to run an agency, it's not the technical stuff, it's the communication piece. It's the connecting with the people you serve, that you're hearing what they need and you're listening and you're explaining, maybe I can't solve everything, but this is what I can do to make it better.
Yeah, I remind people in your line of business that if you have 95% on-time performance, that means that 1 out of 20 trips was late, and that's the one everyone remembers. That would be twice a month your trip was late, and those are the ones that people remember, even if it's 95% on time. I want to open it up for questions in just a minute, but I do want to hit on a couple of things that at least are in the public domain with respect to expansions of the system. I mean, you know what they are. You've got the West East Rail project. You've got what's going on at Alston Landing and the siting of layover facilities. Some people think about the, North-South Rail Link. I don't know, get on the list and sort of where do they fit into the sort of the plans of the regional rail system?
Well, I'll say that we're going right now through the capital investment plan.
Mhm.
And we're trying to evaluate with all the competing needs internally, how best to distribute the dollars that we have and keep projects moving. So a couple things, focus on making sure when we decide on a project, we're taking it all the way through construction. And that doesn't mean we don't do some planning, we don't do some studies, but I found that we're investing in things that if I'm not building it, then let me think about whether or not I continue to design it to 100% and put it on the shelf, right? But as far as modernization and expansion and all of those are all on the table. but I need to make sure that I don't take away from the importance of maintaining the existing infrastructure I have. And I don't have any concerns if we can find a way to fund an expansion project. But if I can't get trains to that new expansion because we've ignored a section in between, that's shame on me for doing that. Having said that, that's the exciting part of what we're doing. How do we balance the needs of today and maintaining the existing infrastructure and deliver a capital program that's building for the future? And I think some of that is making sure we do incremental improvements. Some of that is looking at design standards that if we're building a new facility, whether it's a commuter rail station or whether it's a subway station, let's build something that state of the art, safe, maintainable, not so customized that you can't replace a glass panel if it breaks. Those are the things that we need to look at. As we look to improve service, how do we make sure there's enough competition that then help us deliver it? Right now, as we talk about decarbonization, I know I'm going off regional rail. There's only 2 electric bus manufacturers in the providing services across the nation. And one of them is from Canada right now. So, I mean, with everything going on, we need to make sure we have enough vendors. Mike talked about rolling stock, locomotives. All of these components come from different parts, but there's not a lot of manufacturers that do this. So these are all the things that we're continuing to work on. But getting back to those decisions, we have a lot of things in the works where we're looking to deliver things sooner, and it might not be to the way others expected. The battery electric, we could have very easily said, I don't have enough money to do 10 miles and just say we won't do it until we have it. We pushed ourselves working with Keolis to solve that problem. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do going down the path of how do we continue to improve and expand service, even if we have limited dollars, and then continue to demonstrate that we can be innovative, that we can deliver, that we can execute projects, and we can find ways to maximize the dollars that we have. Because when we get those investments, we don't take it lightly that folks have decided to invest in us. We really have an obligation now to find a way to deliver.
Okay, I'll just throw my oar in the water on West-East Rail as a key priority of the Commonwealth and hope that finds its way to the top of the priority list. People that know me know I haven't met a transportation project I don't like, but I respect the fact that we can't pay for them all. So, but
Let me add
West-East
that
Rail-
because as we look for West-East Rail,
Yeah.
and as we look to improve service that we're currently having, we're pushing ourselves to how do we make trips shorter, right? So that means robust local stops, but also how do we have express
Yeah.
capabilities, right?
Yeah.
How do we actually serve the folks that are further out and make those trips where even if it's robust, it's got to be fast enough that people choose mass transportation. So those are the things that we're top of mind as we look to make these investments. It's important. Shorter trips, more frequent trips, and just the ability to show that we can solve those problems is important. And we're not done yet. We have a lot of ideas that we just haven't been able to
So
out there.
I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple of questions before we close it down. So there's one way back over here, and we'll bring a microphone over and just please identify yourself as you ask the question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Rocco Pigneri. Until a week ago, I actually lived near Upham's Corner, so I was a very frequent Fairmount commuter. So I was excited to hear it as part of the presentation. Something I've noticed, Reedville's really quite an asset to the commuter rail system, right? You've got, I think, 3 or 4 lines that meet there, which take various routes to get there, right? You've got the ones going down the electrified line down to Providence. You've got the Fairmount line itself. I think there's a third set, maybe the Stoughton line. I don't quite know. But my question, what I've noticed though is, if you've got friends out in Norwood and you're going to visit them, you don't always get your connection at Reedville, right? I've looked over and seen the Fairmount line ready to go and then start pulling away as I'm, halfway through the 300 feet between the 2 trains, right? So my question is, dispatch, and then you mentioned also with the South Coast Rail expansion, having 2-seat rides. So is that sort of, dispatching or having trains wait for each other for continuous experience? That's something that's coming in the future, or is that something that's still in the works?
That feedback before, and thank you for the question about the connections that we're introducing at Reedville, and then as you pointed out, that I mentioned at East Taunton. And we have had accounts like you describe of passengers that have been just barely too late to make the connection. So it's something that as we develop the schedules, which we do twice a year, we make sure that we build in enough time and that there are operating instructions for those connecting trains, that where there is a connection actually identified in the schedule, to wait until the connecting train arrives, and any passengers that want to make the connection can do that before you leave. Because there have been a couple of instances where the connecting train departs because the first train is late. And I think in an effort to protect on-time performance, folks are wanting to adhere to the schedule. But in those instances where we're trying to make this a regional rail network, and this is a key element, these connecting services, or a key element of a regional rail network, we need to, in those instances, actually wait for the connecting train. So we're also going to try to bake those into the schedule and make them more clearly identified as scheduled connections. So.
Thank you. My name is David Brooks. I represent Transit X. And I have two questions. We're willing to put a lot of money into the transportation system in Boston. It's for podways, okay? I believe that you guys are the people that I need to present this stuff to. Here's plans for both Boston and high-speed rail. So there's one for you, Phil.
Thank you.
And there's one for you.
Thank
you. Okay. So I have
Fair left out.
No, you're not left out. I got to talk to you later. So basically, podways are something that is not on the planning board, your planning board. And I just want to get it on. What happens with podways, they bring a lot of capital to your system. So you can concentrate the capital that is currently there on doing what needs to be done. And all this expansion goes to a modern system. And I believe you're doing an unbelievable job. I read about you all the time. We are very, very close followers of the MBTA, and it has turned the corner. But the reality is, you guys are trying to stop a computer with an electric typewriter. And it really, really is the time to actually be in your conversation at the board level.
David, can we get to the questions?
The question is what do you know about pods?
Oh. They have reading material now. So
Thank
I'm
you.
sure that they'll follow up, and appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
I sent an innovation plan in yesterday.
Okay. Great. Other questions over here?
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Ruth Bond, Senior Transportation Consultant. Just to start with, thank you for your optimism and your philosophy on more service, more ridership. It's been a long time since we've seen that sort of an approach to the rail system, and we appreciate it. Couple questions. One is, and I won't get into West Station and Alston layover, but on the fare media, how quickly are we going to see interoperability between the Zone 1 subway fares and the commuter rail or regional rail system, so that people can move seamlessly between the rail and the subway? And secondly, if you had to prioritize beyond rolling stock, if you had to prioritize the three most important capital investments to kind of provide stability to your system, what would those projects be?
Great questions. Interoperability of fares.
Well, the contactless
Okay,
tap
media.
and go system that we have right now has been rolled out last year on our subways and buses. The next phase is to actually implement the new Charlie card and allow the system to adapt for our monthly ticket holders, our reduced fare riders. That is coming this spring. And then the next phases are to incorporate a single contract or single account with our regional rail, with our ferries, with our paratransit. All of that is staged out. I don't have the exact date of when the the rail part of it is going to be implemented, but that is in the works. And, I know some of our sister agencies have not gone that direction, but I also know that if I want the system to be easier for riders, I think a single management account, the same tap and go is instrumental. So we are committed to delivering that for our rail riders as well as all the other modes. And what was the other question?
Three investment categories that you would prioritize,
Well, as far as rolling stock, I think,
aside from that.
in addition to rolling stock,
Yeah.
accessibility is going to be a big thing. We have a lot of dollars in not only the rail side, but the subway side. We want everyone who needs to use the system, but that goes to stations as well and the facilities. But you're also going to see us looking creatively, how do we continue to build on the system that they need? We right now have an investment going on signalization on the Worcester corridor because we want to improve service there. We want to be able to continue to build off of what people are experiencing. And then we need to make sure that our track infrastructure, I think one of the things that I wanted to focus on, and Mike's team is taking a hard look, how do we get to that modernization? How do we get to that level of service? And where are those key strategic points that we want to actually do something sooner rather than later? And then long-term is how do we actually support West East Rail? How do we partner with our MassDOT colleagues? Because it's not just serving, the greater part of Boston. Having worked at Long Island Railroad, I know that mass transportation is just as important to those communities, albeit maybe not as many riders, but the ability to do it is just as important. So how do I make sure I'm serving the entire network and I'm actually making it available to those folks that may not have a station in the area? So I am going to be talking about not only what we're doing here, but how do we encourage people that don't think about using MBTA to actually use it. And I know that's not the investment, but that's a part of how do I drive the needs and our decisions going forward.
So just to sum up, this is kind of redundant, but I know Phil agrees with all of this. For me, it's track capacity, it's station accessibility projects, it's south side maintenance facilities, and it's power infrastructure, electric power infrastructure.
Right.
I think Mike did allude to it earlier. Electrification is long-term goal, but we want to do it sooner. At the same time, we need to get rid of constraints that would minimize or diminish the value of electrification. So if we have single track territory, we really need to eliminate those bottlenecks. And if we want to have more trains, and I know there's not this place to talk about it, but we do want to look at then where do we stage those trains and where do, those are important things.
Real issues.
And the hard
Yeah.
part is we serve a diverse geographic area. So how do we manage the needs of each individual area we serve, but also manage and deliver something that serves the greater good? So that's
Okay.
where it always is communication and hearing feedback, and then coming back with explanations and rationale for what is the best solution. And then making tough decisions because these decisions are not always easy, knowing that with such a diverse communities that we serve, not everyone will agree with what we do.
Right. I'm going to squeeze in one more quick question and answer if we can.
Hi, thank you. I'm John Fernari. I'm the general manager of Lighthouse Inn in West Dennis on Cape Cod. I'm also a director on the Dennis Chamber of Commerce. I just wanted to ask your vision for the Cape Flyer and how you're going to reach out and, partner with stakeholders in the area to really make it robust, both for the riders and for the community in the Cape. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to plan on the similar kind of Cape Flyer service that we did last year. We are working with the Army Corps of Engineers through our partners at MassDOT to see if there's opportunities to close the bridge more frequently to allow more frequent trips. That is a perennial desire of ours that we don't have control over. But if we did have that ability, certainly we would operate a more robust Cape Flyer schedule in the summer.
Okay. In the spirit of transportation, I want an on-time rating as well. So we're going to wrap it there. I'll end by thanking you both for your time today, for presenting the state of commuter rail and your vision for the system. I think I'd echo Ruth's comment about it is refreshing to hear the way you're thinking about it, the philosophical approach to transportation services, particularly our regional rail network. But as important, I would commend you, Phil, and Mike, and the rest of the team for what you've delivered so far. And, that success earns the trust, confidence, and support of not just the business community, but the ridership and everybody else. And it's a key to building up that trust and confidence, as you know. So keep up that work, and thank you for what you do. Please join me in thanking Mike and Phil. So we'll continue this series on April 15th. Our focus will be much more local mobility within the city of Boston, and we'll feature our Chief of Streets, Joshua Franklin Hodge. I'm sure that he'll have an interesting conversation with us in the business community about bike lanes and other such things that are going on in the city of Boston. But once Mike and Phil get them here, people need to sort of be able to move around, and the ability for commerce and people to live their daily lives within a city like Boston is critical. So, how does this all fit together? So we'll have the Chief of Streets for the city of Boston on April 15th. So take a look at our website and stay tuned for the invitations to that coming soon. And thank you all here with us in the room and participating virtually for joining us here today. Great, thanks. Have a good rest of the day.